BC, as you're kind of processing what you saw last night, what was your biggest takeaway the more you think about what took place at PBA last night, as far as, what does this mean for Nebraska basketball? Is it just a really nice night? Is it sort of validation of the season we thought they were having? Like, how do you process what you saw?
Well, in the big picture, it's the kind of win that if this team is what they think they are, it helps push them over the hump when it's decision time. Now they have to, over the next 2 months, continue to be steady enough to make this count for what it's supposed to, right? Like you can't just fall off the cliff now and not win some more games. But I think this team last night showed when they play their best ball. They can be a tourney team, and they can compete with anybody in the league. And the beauty about last night, Hoiberg said in his post game, but it was completely true. Every guy that touched the floor for Nebraska sort of maximized what he can do well. Like Bryce Williams woke up yesterday and didn't think he was going to play. He couldn't. When he did the morning walk to the bathroom, he said it wasn't feeling too hot, and he wasn't thinking it was going to happen. And he ends up with an incredible stat line considering 9 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 block shots. He had sort of the grown man play that I thought like sealed it at the end, where Edey's going in for a typical like Zach Edey layup or dunk or whatever to cut into the lead. And Bryce Williams comes and swats it from behind. But then you have CJ Wilcher, like accepting his role all season and coming off in the second half and just catching fire for 16. Casey was there in these stretches where he would just be on. And then, Sammy Hoiberg had a great game defensively. You just go down the line. Everybody did their job really well. You get a night like that. I could tell 2 minutes in, I didn't know that Nebraska was going to win, but you could see that it was a different team than Saturday in Wisconsin. There was just like an energy and intensity to the defense and the way they crashed on their doubles on Zach Edey and the plan they had on that side of the floor that you thought they're going to make Purdue have to earn this one at least. And sure enough, they did that and more.
BC, we heard a lot about 1982 last night, the last time Nebraska took down a number 1 seed. But I want you to stick with recent Nebraska history for this question. Fill in the blank. This was the biggest win in recent Nebraska history since when?
Oh, man. I'm going to skip something in between. It wasn't like No Sit Sunday. We have a way of like making what just happened above other things. Like it wasn't that same intensity throughout the whole day. And like the third deck wasn't even full last night. And there's reason. It was cold, it was snowy, all that stuff. I'm sure there's some people that didn't expect it was going to go the way it did. But as far as you think of Nebraska's track record, they had a good team under Tim Miles that won a lot of games at near the end of his tenure that didn't make it. And there's probably a win or two in there that those guys would say at the moment felt pretty special. But for a team that actually right now, I think people now say this could really happen. I could see this team's name on the bracket. I think it's the biggest win since that game against Wisconsin that everybody remembers. Just because if you look at the track record of Husker basketball, there hasn't been a tourney team since then. So and this team's got a shot. Now it goes back to the first question Ravi asked that you've got to fill in the blanks now the rest of the way, right, Andrew, to make it like the sort of game that in March we're like, yeah, that one right there, otherwise it just is another one that kind of fizzles into the background a bit. So they've given it a great opportunity though for it to be one of those kind of select Husker games that everyone who was there will proudly speak about, 5 years from now, and those who weren't there will say they were there.
All right.
It's gonna be what
it's like the Nirvana did a concert at like Duffy's Tavern and like before Nevermind came out or something, and now everybody who was on the UNL campus at the time now says they were at that concert, I think, but I'm guessing that wasn't the case.
Didn't realize that venue held 100,000. That's
I don't. Yeah, it's amazing.
What's the other? Is it the Matt Davison catch that everybody claims they were at? What's the other one? There's a football one that everybody claims they were at. I can't. It's like, no, there were not 1.4 million people at that game. I promise.
Yeah. Yeah. The third deck was not filled up last night, but it was a lively crowd. The crowd that was there was great. And I also understand with the weather why it was what it was. But yeah, it was a great atmosphere. PBA is a really tough place to play. I think Big Ten teams and coaches have found out when Nebraska's playing good ball, because that crowd does get on you. It gets on the refs. It lets them know. And it was that sort of energy in the building last night.
BC, we're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. How much do you think this means for, we don't usually this far into a coach's tenure, we don't talk about kind of program defining wins or things like that, because frankly, if you haven't had one by this point, you usually don't make it that far into your tenure. But Nebraska's obviously stood by Fred Hoiberg, and it seems like that is really starting to pay off in a big way. How would you define last night's win in terms of what it means for Fred Hoiberg's tenure here at Nebraska?
Well, right now it is that signature game that stands out. There were others where they had nice wins, but it wasn't to this level, and winning at Creighton last year, you can't take away from that. I mean, that's a team that almost made the Final Four, and
Sure,
Nebraska had a great day and beat them. So, I mean, you could make an argument there. But the fact that Purdue came in number one, and I really feel like, I know you guys know your hoops well. I mean, Purdue's a legit one to me, or was a number one. Like that's a once in a while there'll be that team that they're really good, but the rankings sort of fall their way for a week and they're number one. It's like, oh, that was nice. We knew they'd get knocked off in a week or two. I think people kind of suspected Purdue might stay there a while when you look at just their non-conference wins. And I mean, people can look it up. There's like Marquette, Arizona, Alabama, Tennessee, Xavier, Illinois. It's really impressive. So in that way, I don't think it's rivaled. Also, I feel like there's more energy behind this team than even when they won in Omaha last year, that they could actually make it to the, onto a bracket at this moment. And so I think it's a top one. You got to give Fred credit. He reset the way they did things a year ago. This is the second year of that. They kind of went back and changed how they're going to fill a roster out, the type of players they were bringing in. And I think Trev Alberts liked seeing that, frankly. And so it's kind of year two of the reset, I guess I would say. And in that respect, it's going pretty well at this moment.
BC, I was listening to Coach Rule last night talk in a separate interview about how everybody says they want to build, but not everyone wants to take the time to build. How cool / a major credit is it to Trev Alberts to have two coaches in Hoiberg and in Coach Rule that embrace the build?
Well, I think to succeed as a coach in this day and age, you have to want to be a builder in some ways. At the same time, you have to have like an urgency to that build. Like there's the deadlines get moved up with everything, it feels like. Now Fred's had his time to kind of work things out, obviously. But it's so different how you build now. And I think the guys who evolve with the times the best and understand, okay, I may not love like everything that college sports is right now, but through the portal and things, I'm going to figure out the best way to do it with what the situation is in front of us at this moment. And I feel like Rule, if you sat him down and said, is this your ideal version of what college sports or football should look like right now? I would guess he'd say no. And yet he knows that that's what it is. Let's work with what it is. Let's do our best with that setup and what's put before us. And I think they're trying to do that. And I think you're kind of seeing the same thing with Hoiberg. I mean, this is a team where he worked, him and his staff, Coach Lenzer and those guys worked their butts off over those couple months to get guys like Rink Mast and Bryce Williams. I mean, it's elbows out for those type of players. And Nebraska wasn't able to land like every big dog out there, like Hunter Salas, and some of these guys who at times like Nebraska fans wanted, but they kind of pinpointed some guys they had a legitimate shot to get. They worked hard on them. They saw how they could fit into the puzzle, and they worked with the system in front of us to put together a team that looks pretty good right now. So I to your question, I think you have to be a builder, but you also have to be like a timely builder,
No, I absolutely get that. And based on what you just said, it had me thinking, because we talk about how this Nebraska basketball team is built to be an NCAA tournament team this season. How about on the football side of things, though? How patient or how long do you think it will take for Nebraska football to be built to be a college football playoff team, and what we now know what it will be as a 12-team playoff?
I mean, I'm not going to make a big proclamation here because every offseason we kind of talk ourselves into like, oh, this is going to happen. And then it's been stuck on 5 wins for a while. I do know the person who matters, Matt Rule, when you listen to him do interviews, thinks they can get a lot done pretty soon. He said as much. And so whether that can be a reality or not, I don't know. But I think they like the culture they have. I think they like the fact that, you watched the championship game the other night, and Michigan is just an example of like what it means to be dominant on both sides of the ball in the trenches, where guys can just take over a game, especially on that D line. And I feel like if there's one thing you want to be really encouraged about with Husker football, to the question you asked and trying to make that big move, is I actually did think at the end of last year on both sides of the ball, especially the D line in the trenches, they had taken a step. Like I felt like they were a better crew and better equipped to deal with the Big Ten than they had been. And that's a huge deal. Of course, the quarterback piece was missing. And so we're about to find out if they found that piece over time. There's sure a lot of hope about it, and for good reason. But I think within the trenches, they're building it in a way that they can be pretty competitive at that. I don't want to say the college football playoff level at this point, but to at least get some respect back on Nebraska's name, and you're in the postseason of some sort and making some noise again. So I do see signs that can happen.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, I want to go back to what you were talking about with kind of the nature of Fred Hoiberg building this team, because I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it didn't seem like he was necessarily interested in being a quote unquote builder when he got here. It seemed like they were trying to do a lot of quick fixes, kind of trying to do the same type of thing that he did at Iowa State, and kind of realized, oh, hey, that's not going to work this time, and had to shift his mindset and his philosophy sort of midway. You talked about this is really year 2 of his sort of revisioned Nebraska team. Is it fair to say that like this is maybe not how he intended to do this job in the first place, but has made it work on the fly?
That's possible. That'd be a really good question to ask him in one of the next meetings with him. I do think they got some really talented players in here early on in his time at Nebraska, but they just didn't fit together right. It just wasn't the right puzzle. And sometimes it was like, Bryce McGowan's was a really entertaining player and is doing fine for himself as a basketball player, but just the way the pieces worked around him and stuff, it just didn't feel like a team to me sometimes. And this does now, the last 2 years, like it, whether it's good or bad, you feel like all the pieces kind of work off each other in a way that wasn't previously. And so I give them credit for switching on the fly. They definitely did some of that, because there's no doubt that it's a different I don't know. It's just a different type of squad that they have now. And they've really emphasized, when they go into the portal, finding those guys who have been in college basketball maybe 4 or 5 years, who are pretty productive, and yet they're not the guys like everybody's pointing to. Like Bryce Williams had a really good career at Charlotte, and maybe not as good as he even hoped, but he came on at the end of last season, was like the CBI MVP or whatever, And even before that was balling out, and this staff realized that they thought the best of him was still to come. He's 6'7" and can do all the, score at all the levels. And then Rink Mast, I think they believed even before this season, they got an absolute steal of a guy who is just like a workhorse. He can shoot it from outside, and he just gave Edey fits last night. I mean, there was help on the defensive side with what they did against Edey, but Rink Mast played his butt off in that game. And he's just found the right guys for this time. And now they got to finish it. I don't want to, I hope we don't come back here 2 weeks and they've lost, you've lost 4 or 5 and all that. That there are dips in the season, but right now it does feel really good about the roster they have and how they're playing together.
BC, we got about 4.5 minutes left. I want to change gears and talk a little football now. We're in that window for Jamal Banks when at least the timetable for his decision is supposed to happen from this Wednesday to Friday period here. Where are you at in terms of where you think he's leaning? And if he doesn't end up at Nebraska, where do you kind of sit in terms of offensive completement from before the signings this weekend to where you are now?
I think if they add him, they really did the best they could as far as pieces with the numbers they have, because there aren't a lot of numbers to work with. So you've got Dowdell. Nayer's a really interesting player because Isaiah Nayer, he's hurt at Texas, and maybe you wish there would have been a little more production this last season, but he had that ACL injury in August of last year. And just his capabilities and the way Sarkisian talked to him about him prior to that injury makes me think there's a very high ceiling there if he can meet it, going forward. With Banks, I don't know. I'm optimistic about it for Nebraska. I last messaged him on Sunday, and I've kind of left it there with him because he told me, at the earliest I'm deciding midweek, and at the latest I want to decide it, as you mentioned, at the end of the week. And so today we're there now, I guess, so we'll see if he announces anything. I do know Michigan was interested in him, and it was kind of a weird deal because last week, of course, all of Michigan's attention is on something else. And so you're not getting a lot of information about really what happened there. And I don't know if there's still interest. He visited a lot of places before Christmas break too, good schools, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Purdue, Minnesota. So he's got options on the table. But he felt wanted at Nebraska. He liked their blueprint, and he certainly had good things to say. So I think there is a chance there. We'll see.
BC, if they don't land Banks for some reason, do you think they're still in the market for another transfer portal wide receiver? Or do you think they kind of look it through and they go, yeah, no, we're okay with this?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know if it would happen in this cycle at this point, but maybe that's something after the spring you revisit. Although it'd be really nice to have that person if it's a junior or senior who you want to help the young guys and has been around the block to be there for spring ball. So I think there is a big, benefit right now if that guy comes at this moment. But yeah, I wouldn't just close the door on the idea, because if there's an open spot, you feel like now, who's to say there wouldn't be that, several months from now. But it feels like it's down to a couple guys. We'll see if there's a defender that could still be in the picture or not. But I think it's 1 or 2 spaces left at most, and maybe there's going to be none. That's always a possibility in these deals. They're very fluid.
That's Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate your time as always, and we will catch up with you again next week.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Appreciate you, BC.
That's our guy, BC from Husker 24/7. Good stuff there.
Always.
As always.